Okay, folks. We are looking at House Bill 36, 10, passing on alcohol pricing and addiction services. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Those of you online, Adam, will go ahead and get a roll call, please.
Senator Solomon. Senator Canoe.
Present.
Chair Sanchez. Representative Reschke. Okay, I see him. Chief Barrett.
Representative Reschke, you are now unmuted and we didn't hear your acknowledgement.
I'm sorry, present by video. Thank you.
Yes.
Chief Barrett. Vaughn Berry. Okay. Rob Corbett. Annalise Dolph. Jamie Floyd. Dr. Tom Jean. Todd Jeter. John Colmer. Sarah Lochner. Jana McCamey.
Present by video.
Director Prince.
Present.
Marcus Reed. Jason Renault. There's Todd. Okay. Janelle Romaine. Valera Salazar. Aaron Sarnoff Wood. Quorum is present.
Things to discuss very openly. The poll went out, and you know, of course, about the dates, the proposed dates for the second or the last week in July, for an additional meeting. While we do have a forum on the Friday, the 26th opportunity, I'm sure everybody's not thrilled to death with that one. But so I will just say that recognizing a lot of different things, in particular about timing. I would prefer at this point that we not hear the presentations on July 18th. For two votes that were again going to be more stats and more details and things that I think we would have available to us in any way if we, any other way, if we wanted to actually hear them. We have a lot of reported information. We have a lot of detailed stats available on the website. We have a lot of really give us a lot of information that we need to fit. So my suggestion at this point in time is that we eliminate the presentation on July 18th and go ahead and use that time for our discussions and probably not do July 26th meeting. But if people feel like we need that time, we can also do that. But that is my suggestion at this point in time, that I would take that recommendation to committee, whatever, and figure out whether or not that's a doable situation for folks. And I know I just sort of like bam that on both of you. I've talked to a couple of you about it, but I didn't get a chance to talk to everyone. That's my suggestion at this point. I feel like we have heard a lot of information, a lot of detail. We don't necessarily need to do any more at this point in time. Can we move forward? Can I get a general consensus maybe of moving forward? Okay, I've got thumbs up. Do I have appropriate yes or no's from the committee members online? We good? Yeah, okay. I don't see a negative at all yet, so I'm gonna go with a general consensus of not necessarily doing those presentations. We've got enough time where we can politely decline the request or rescind the request, I suppose, for those presentations. Because I think it's going to be really, really important that we spend some time talking about things. Now, back to the other part of the question, whether or not we decide to meet on the 26th, if we want to hold that date and have it available to us if we decide on the 18th that we need more time. It's from 1 to 4, I believe.
Yes, we divided the additional hours from 1 to 4 on the one. July 26 seems to be the consensus. And it will be, if you do extend the July 18th meeting, there will be discussion around different recommendations. That can be presented at that meeting as well. So a reminder that the letter will be going out to task force members at the end of this meeting about the different recommendations and areas.
So yes, we have to start getting to a place where we can actually start to develop the plan that is about how we're going to develop here. Time is being short, and I just want to make sure that people are very aware of that. Again, you'll have this letter really soon. It will sort of lay out some of the parameters and things that we talked about, or that are talked about in the bill, and we come forward with some recommendations. So that is my hope. I'm happy to hold the 26th, July 26th, if we feel like we need more time on the 18th. Happy to let that go if we don't. Everybody seem okay with that? Are there objections? So we put it that way. Are there any objections to not having a presentation on the 18th and still holding the 26th just in case? That means we are going to be here on the 18th. We're just going to use that time for you can wait initially suggested. Okay.
That's a 1 to 3 good. Or that 1 to 4.
The July 18th is 1 to 3.
Okay, thank you.
I am unfortunately Thursdays are for me sandwiched in between 2 ongoing meetings that I can't not do. I can't extend that day, but a Friday I can. So okay, yes.
Picture first of our company usually going out to observe this for the next meeting.
How do people feel about that? I'm sold with this room actually. I really like looking straight ahead at the books on the line rather than off to the sides. So that works for me. Okay. For those of you who normally make it in person, I appreciate that effort as well because that's so bad. Okay. So that decided, let us move forward then with our OLCC presentation.
Ready?
Go for it, sir.
All right. Well, for the folks online, this is Craig Prince, OLCC Executive Director. Thank you so much for that cue up. And I think this will also be kind of a switch in focus, like the chair said, kind of from talking about facts and figures about alcohol harm and those important things too. I'm really going to focus on the control system in Oregon. And I think you'll see why, because that then helps us to define the categories of alcohol, and the categories then define how alcohol is taxed. And then we will get into some of those questions that kept coming up about how much revenue and where is it distributed and how. And so, yeah, I think this is a shift in focus. I want to thank all of you all, first of all, for the education on really the addiction treatment and medical part of this continuum. And I want to do a couple of intros to make sure we do have a couple new people. So Online is my chair of the OLCC, Dennis Doherty. Dennis is calling in and graciously came in. Thanks, Dennis, for coming in. And Dennis has been our chair since October 23. I wanted to, hi, Dan, say hi to you, Dan, welcome. And then I wanted to, not rather than just go around to everyone, I just wanted to recognize we are going to talk a lot about distilled spirits and the distribution of distilled spirits. So I've got Steve Robbins here. He's the director of distilled spirits for OLCC. So when we talk about some of these definitions, partially I brought more people in case you guys had any questions. Feel free to ask me. I'll do my darndest to answer. And then if I can't, I will start playing air guns and see if I need to take an expert. Speaking of experts too, Mazen, I think, is on the line again. And I want to thank Mazen from Legislative Revenue Office for his continued presence online. Mazen, I hope I get this right. If I don't, it's fine to correct me. So we'll get started. And I do have, yeah, I think it'll feel different. It's a different atmosphere. I do have one part where I'm going to have, we're going to talk about the, the blending of the categories. You know, like this is an innovative market. You've got new non-alcohol beverages coming out. You've got beverages in different packaging and things. So I have a couple of the packaging things that there'll be a test in the middle of this, which is what alcohol category does this fit in? And how many servings of alcohol is in that container? Don't worry, it should be fun. Slide. So yeah, back to, as the chair said, and I want to give a shout out to so much of the task force's charge is really more in the hands of you all as experts on alcohol addiction, alcohol prevention, alcohol treatment. And I want to really define where OLCC fits in. I want to give a shout out to Annalise, really in charge of, you know, with the ADPC having the overarching strategy for the state, and Dr. Tom at OHA, and then the folks from the counties that have spoken into this. Just want to we have an important but limited place in this continuum, and I want to make sure I say and define our space, because I think all of us, my staff and my commission and myself, we're all very proud of the place we have in regulating excessive consumption of alcohol and cannabis. And so I just wanted to call out, though, a lot of this is not my area of expertise. Slide, please, Adam. So really where OLCC, if you use and again, Tom, I don't know if I borrowed this from you. I know I borrowed it from someone that went prior. So either you or Dean or Annalise. To you?
Yeah.
Plagiarism. Plagiarism is the flattery. OLCC is upstream predominantly. And what I mean by that is we regulate how alcohol is bought and sold in Oregon. And I want to just pause there because that is a really important focus. So we are a partner to prevention, but most prevention, as we know, is youth prevention. It's messaging, it's awareness. Our place is regulatory and legal. And so we set that legal framework for, and we'll talk about it with the different categories. For distilled spirits, we distribute. We are the wholesaler and the retailer. We set the price. We set how many locations. But also through licensing, we regulate. Aaron invited me to come down and see his cidery. I love seeing it. We get out to the bars and restaurants, and that's really our function. So our mission is really there, but you can see how important it is, I think, to downstream. And next slide, Adam. Just again, I think Dr. Tom or Dr. Dean gave us this slide. So rather than alcohol addiction or alcohol use disorder, which you can see is downstream, our focus is excessive alcohol, and we spent some time, I think it was in February, really talking about what that means. And I've come back to that again and again because I feel like that definition is an area of agreement for all of us, I think. Remember, there's 4 definitions of excessive alcohol use: pregnant women, because of the obvious impacts on the fetus, fetal alcohol issues; under 21, which is a huge emphasis area of our regulatory function. So for both alcohol and cannabis, I was going to make a joke that we have a minor decoy in the room behind us. But that minor decoy program has been going since the year 2000. And what we do is we have an inspector, an OLCC inspector, and a young person under 21, and they go together to a licensed establishment and attempt to buy some beer. And we're also now doing that with alcohol delivery to the home, which I'm sure I'll get a chance to report on some of the unique challenges of that.
They call it her at the big house.
Yeah, we look for a little bit older usually. But in all honesty, during COVID, we had to stop. We had to stop doing it because we didn't want to put a young person in harm during the pandemic. And that our compliance rate really dropped. So I would say the good thing is we realized our compliance matters. Our efforts matter. So during the pandemic, it dropped to about a 60% success rate. Success rate means they would have carded her and said, you can't buy, and they didn't serve. I'm pleased to say we've got that back up to 76% for alcohol, and props for recreational adult cannabis, it's up to 87%. And our target for the legislature, this is one of our performance benchmarks, is 90%. So I want to hit those areas of agreement. No, it is a crime in Oregon to sell to someone who is under 21, but we take on that regulatory function with our licensees. And that is our most common regulatory action. Nicole is here. I know she's been in different parts of OLCC, but I was thinking of hearings and getting a finding and a penalty against the licensee. Binge drinking, the third area. Binge drinking is, I think, an area that we have a lot of agreement that all of us want to address binge drinking. It's defined as 4 or more than 4 for a woman in a single setting, more than 5 servings of alcohol. And this is an important definition. And I know we got it, but it's 0.6 of an ounce of alcohol, or 14 grams. And the reason I say that is that becomes so important as you regulate alcohol, and thinking with the different products with, how much alcohol by volume your product has. So you have some sense of how much alcohol you're consuming. And binge drinking, I think, DUIs, risky sexual behavior, involved in a lot of both the risks to yourself or others. And then the last area is heavy drinking. Heavy drinking is more that chronic impacts. I think we've got more than 14 in a week of that 0.6 ounce serving is considered heavy drinking and would fit into excessive alcohol, and then more than 7 for a woman in a week. And so I wanted to spend some time, because just to differentiate where the ADPC or OHA and all that focus on prevention as a messaging, or alcohol addiction and treatment, we're in that space of excessive use. And there's good reason to be there. A lot of studies, if people delay using cannabis, delay using alcohol, much less likely for the folks to progress to that right side of the continuum, where I've heard different statistics, 2 months, but I think it's, an alcohol use disorder sounds like it's maybe below 12%. I can't remember the exact percentage that get there. And then, of course, we've learned once folks get there, treatment is very expensive and hard to access. And there's a dearth of people who can really provide that right now because of education and all the other things. So I wanted to just define that and say, we're about at OLCC, the public health and safety mission of reducing excessive use, and really, to say it more specifically, really moderate use. We know that some folks will choose not to consume alcohol, and I love personally that that's becoming more normalized. It used to be, why aren't you drinking? I think now people realize there's a lot of good reasons that people don't drink alcohol. But we'll talk about moderate use and how the control model fits into that. Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit of history, and then I promise that we'll get right to our definitions and some of the tax and distribution issues. So how did we get here? We've had some experiments. So before Prohibition, we had an experiment kind of in a legal product without regulation, which would be on the right. And that period of time, you did not have restrictions on sales to minors. You had sales that can be summed up in what was called the saloon system. And I know we don't think of saloons except for like in Westerns, but saloons were basically places where a lot of times one supplier would supply to that retailer and would do a monopoly, would try to monopolize the market in that place. That supplier was often separated, so you didn't have the community protective factors of selling a product of your own in your own backyard, making sure you're responsible to your community. Some of the things I've read about is at those saloons, you could buy alcohol on your paycheck. So like you could get an advance on your paycheck, which had problems for the families, of course, those that were drinking. Whiskey was often pushed. There was a higher markup for it's distilled spirits. And so that saloon model was really in people's minds pre-prohibition, typified by a profit motive that drove low cost, trying to take hold of a full market share. We did an experiment to combat that. It's called Prohibition. The states tried it out individually, and then there was a federal prohibition that, of course, was repealed in 1933. But to be clear, that on the left side, it did reduce consumption. I think most people would agree with that. It also caused a lot of other social problems. It drove to drinking underground. You had federal enforcement without a lot of state and local buy-in. So you had a very small law enforcement contingency that was trying to do a national, enforce a national law, which resulted in a lot of discriminatory enforcement, unenforced enforcement. And to be clear, at that time, anything with 0.5% was defined as unfit for human consumption. So it was a total prohibition. And so right at the end of that, President Roosevelt amended the Volstead Act, which was the way they enabled that through Congress, allowed for light beer. So 3.2%, if you know, that's where that comes from, right? Is 3.2 was allowed. And then it was, the prohibition was repealed in 33. So why did I go into that? One, I like history, but go ahead, slide. I don't want to just indulge my interest in history. So the reaction of the pre-prohibition and post-prohibition was really nationally, you had a 3-tier system. And the 3-tier system, you'll hear everyone in the alcohol space talk about that, but it was designed to address some of the ills of that saloon system. So I want to kind of point out the 3 parts of that 3-tier system, and kind of the obviously there's federal and state enforcement, because now federally it's legal, unlike marijuana, which is of course still federally illegal, unless it's defined as hemp. So I probably more than most people appreciate that we have a federal partnership on how to regulate this alcohol area, which is very, very highly regulated. So our federal partners, the TTB, I would say they focus on that first tier with packaging, Aaron, with like we were talking with cleanliness of your cidery or of the brewery. And then the distributor is really a key in this 3-tier for 2 reasons that I want to highlight, really 3. The first one is it separates the supplier from the community retailer. And that is a way to separate, and so that one manufacturer cannot monopolize a single bar. So if you go to Italy, you'll still see they only have about two kinds of beers you buy in most places. And that middle tier to allow that separation really is why we have a proliferation of different choices. Second, and most important to someone whose job is to collect taxes, a state entity, that distributor really collects the privilege tax or the excise tax for us in a way. So it's really when the manufacturer in Oregon makes it available for sale, the distributor makes sure the tax is paid because the tax is at that excise place. If it's imported from outside, that's when the tax is made. I've tried to get an estimate for the different, for beer and wine, what percentages are from import to Oregon versus created here. I think for beer, I've seen maybe 80% imported. I've seen all over, Danelle, I don't know, different percentages. Unfortunately, with our Opto, we just are not.
Vast majority is paid by the distributor, but self-distributing manufacturers don't excise tax if they don't distribute.
Yeah, and and to anything, there's always exceptions. And when there's been 90 years of lawyering, there's exceptions to this system. So I'm hitting kind of the overview. The third area is safety. So if you have a product that needs to be pulled from the shelf, say there's glass in the container, we rarely have problems with non-ethanol alcohol or poisonous alcohol. But if you did, we could pull it. So that distributor tier is really important. And then the third tier is all of our licensees. So you think bars, restaurants, all of the places you can buy alcohol, grocery stores, mini markets, think thousands of places there that the distributor brings the alcohol to. This is a closed system, right? This is meant to be how alcohol is bought and sold in Oregon. And so that's really the 3-tier system. Oregon, we'll see on the next slide, has another layer on that. And that is from this book, which I recommend if you're going to be in the alcohol space. It's called Toward Liquor Control. It's from 1933. It's really a recommendation to go with a control system. And I'll explain what that means and why. This area of alcohol regulation, it's funny, if you look at Gallup polling, it's one of the few areas where citizens like a lot of control in this area. They want this to be a regulated space. The control system, if you go back one, Adam, go back one, that middle tier is not a licensee distributor like the group that Danelle represents, the distributors of beer and wine and other products. In the control system, that's the state. The state is the wholesaler. The state is the one that imports it into a warehouse, purchases it from the supplier, and then distributes it to retail. And so to separate it, you have alcohol, wine, cider, where you have a licensee in the distributor, and you have licensees in the retailer's tier. And then for distilled spirits, you have Steve's team is basically buying the distilled spirits, warehousing it in a bailment agreement, And then when it goes out of the warehouse, the state has purchased it. And then it's given to only 285 locations, 285 liquor stores that are run by our agents. And that is a way to restrict access and control access so that people can control themselves, basically. And the idea behind it is make access to the lighter alcohol beverages more common. And there's a quote from the book there. So that's the control model. And it's important because it's a big investment. It's a big public health investment, and it's really designed to separate access of the different categories. Okay. Am I doing okay? Does anyone have any questions? Just hit the history part. So now we can move on. Okay, so I recommend this book. The why of that control model made its way into Oregon in 1933. You could see the kind of the negatives of it is to prevent abuses associated with saloons, eliminate the evils of unlicensed and unlawful manufacture, and then the positive is to promote temperance, to promote the consumption of lighter beverage, to protect the health, safety, welfare, health, peace, and morals of the people of the state of Oregon, and to encourage the development of all Oregon industry, and specifically the alcohol industries, and then the hotel and companion industries in Oregon. So why liquor control? It's an about face from Prohibition that said everything over 0.5% is unfit. You differentiate and you regulate basically based upon the fermentation method, but that was a proxy for the alcohol content. And this is a quote from the book: "The sales of stronger drinks should be regulated under a program which, so far as practicable, discourages consumption with increasing strictness as the alcohol content increases." They specifically were saying, we find no evidence to support that satisfying a taste for beer develops a craving for whiskey. That was the perception of 1933, and that's what we still do. We separated for those public health and safety purposes, small number of access points, and the profit motive is kind of blunted by that middle tier. Okay, slide. All right, so enough history. So how does this work? Well, it works with laws and statutes, like any kind of regulatory system. So lots of lawyers involved. It starts with the Oregon Constitution. There's two important things I want to raise. That is one, Article 4, Section 25 of the Oregon Constitution requires a 3/5 vote for revenue raising measures. And that's from 1996. I was trying to remember when that was from. It's from Measure 25 in 1996. And then I did check with some of my staff, Article 1, Section 39 of the Oregon Constitution does talk about the Liquor Control Act and its purpose of promotion of temperance and the use of and consumption of alcoholic beverages, encouraging the use and consumption of lighter beverages, and aid in the establishment of the industry. So then you've got statutes under that, and we're going to talk about now the statutes that define the different categories of alcohol. And then we're going to talk about how they're each taxed. And then they're going to talk about how they're distributed. Those are all in statute. So to change those requires an act, a legislative act, and a signature by the governor. And then we at OLCC have administrative rules that then help us to carry out the minutia of all of this and get it so that our licensees understand this system. All right, so let's get into the definitions. So the first one, you can see, I think I hit all this. The definitions in Oregon have an ABV in them, an alcohol by volume, and I put in the statutes where the definitions and the taxes are. And again, these are statutes. Go ahead to malt beverage. Malt beverage has a broad categorization. It was updated in 2021 by the Oregon legislature, but it's from 0.5% to 16%. So that's a broad category. The traditional Coors or lager beers are around 5%. Your IPAs are typically more higher ABV. And then obviously this includes those higher ABV beverages that are what I would define as a malt liquor that have a much higher alcohol content. So that's the malt beverage definition. Wine definition also, I think, was looked at in 2021. It's up to 21%, and it has a differentiation within it for dessert wines. So it includes, and I'll get into that, but this is the definition of wine. As you can see, it's by the fermentation process, but in Oregon law, it also has an ABV. And last but not least, we have cider. Go ahead, Adam.
Quick question on that, Tom DiNoce. Just out of curiosity, if it doesn't include cider, I didn't see grapes in the definition. So how do you, based on different fruits, how do you define, or is it just ABV?
I think I went over so let me hit the cider definition. I think it'll help. So cider is up to 8.5, right, Aaron? And then if it's over 8.5, it's becomes a wine. So you do have some non-grape options that fit the definition of wine, but it's predominantly grape products. So again, this one, the tax categorization changes with the ABV. And that's important, as we'll see, because then the tax rate changes. Wine, again, just like malt, it covers the Pinot Noir, finicky little fruit that best likes to be grown on hillsides in the Willamette Valley or other valleys in Oregon. Oregons are recognized throughout the world, but it's a small percentage of all world wine, obviously. That's a table wine. It goes then all the way up to a 21% fortified or dessert wine. And again, the alcohol content has a real mix. I think for your table wine, probably 8 to 12 ABV for a Pinot Noir, and that's depending on, the climate of how much, where it's grown and things like that. So that's kind of the definitions. Distilled liquor is a catch-all. It's a catch-all of everything else. So it pretty much means anything over 21. And it's also defined by the way it's distilled rather than fermented, but I wanted to hit the ABV too. Okay, any questions on that, Aaron? Did I make a mistake on that?
Oh, just the wine, probably higher.
Yeah, probably higher than that.
15%.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I read up on it. It's all about the temperature and when it's harvested. So it really varies. Okay, so this is the audience participation part. So I have some. So what we've seen is this has always been a market where there's different ABVs. You've got light beers, heavy beers. So I'm just you have to be careful because I don't want to make it sure look wow. Some of it this way, and so it's an innovative space because drinking habits and consumption have changed, I think, in the last few years. But I will say that it also was an innovative space back then. So let me just give you some examples so you can get the idea. So BuzzBall is a product that you can have pretty much in any flavor, and it can be produced with wine, malt, or distilled spirits. And it's a small, under 200 milliliter, and has a 15% alcohol by volume. So, so you can see as you start to look at the products, you have to look at, does the label say it's a wine based? Is it a malt based? And that's going to drive which category it's in, and that's going to drive which how it's tapped. I want to highlight the Fireball because I get a lot of questions about this one, and then I'll talk about the ones I put on. This product is a wine based product. If you look at the bottom, it says great wine with natural whiskeys and cinnamon flavors. So this is outside of the control system. This can be bought in grocery stores because it's wine based.
And do they just do that in control states? Or is that, it might be more expensive by the wine place?
I think so. I think I've seen it as a product all over the state. I don't know, Tyler.
Depends on the tax rates.
Yeah.
They also have experience.
Okay, yeah.
Generally, that it's more favorable to be in wine than the distilled spirits tax rate. Exactly. So, the Smirnoff. So it's just important because this marketplace is really differentiated. So Smirnoff, most of us would think vodka, which would be a distilled spirit, but this is a malt-based Smirnoff Ice. It actually has a fairly low ABV. So all I'm saying is to be an informed consumer, to make sure you're regulating how much alcohol you drank, has become more complicated as the markets try to find a tax rate that is most beneficial and stay up to speed with the way drinking is now. The Four Loko, Laura, you got a Four Loko there. So Four Loko is 23 ounce. It's not a resealable container, and it's about a 14% alcohol. So if you figure out how many alcohol servings is in a Four Loko, it's about 5.5. So if it's consumed at one sitting, it would be binge drinking if a single person does it. And then you got one next to it, Earthquake, that's probably, like this one, Twisted Tea is only 8%. So it's really hard to really understand how much alcohol you're getting because the market is trying to differentiate. So, so here's the quiz. Annalise, let's see. Pick up your big sips, the top one. What alcohol definition would that fit in? What category?
Where'd you pick that one?
You better have your reading glasses.
The print is so small, I still can't read it. You know what that one is?
So it got wine.
That was probably one too.
Yeah, so agave wine. So it kind of goes to, yes, it goes to your question, Tom, like, it's not just grape, but it's different wine, it's different, like, White Claw, yeah. White Claw is made out of sugar cane. So it's just really been a lot of differentiation in the market. So that's my, just to try to make sure, I think one area we can agree on is excessive consumption and maybe thinking about making sure people understand the ABV and the container size and how best to drink responsibly. And, it's really, some of these categories go across big swaths of product. Okay. That was fun, right? Oh, I forgot Jack Daniels. I think this is important too. The Jack Daniels product right there is a Jack Daniels with ginger ale. Another product is Jack and Coke. One thing that want to say, some of the distilled spirits products are now low alcohol by volume, but because they are based upon a distilled spirit, they are in the control. So they're in the warehouse. And one thing I like about that labeling is it's if you look at the Jack and Coke product, it's in a black label, so there's no confusion with the red Coke label. If you can see, it's an alcohol base. Yeah,
Senator.
yes, Senator Solomon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chair. And thanks for the presentation. I just really wanted to make a comment that what concerns me about some of the products that you've brought forward is the youth consumption and the youth, accessibility. I shop at Winco. Those Fireball are on the ground level display case and there for kids to see, take their pictures and everything else. And I think we have to address that. And I'm also concerned because I'm on a school board, and I used to be on a school board. And when there was a big concern around the energy drinks and how they were Four Loko and they were on kids' desks, and teachers had no idea that was alcohol. And that was a thing that students would try to do to deceive. So there has to be some ownership and something around the marketing side of this and how we need to address this for youth prevention. Thank you.
You know, with the urinal sugars, Four Loko is interesting. That used to have, when it first came out, it had caffeine in it. It's actually one of the first products that the OLCC decided to pull and regulate for public health reasons. So actually, it's a good example of how the system really works well, because people were concerned about the combination of alcohol and caffeine. And this also happened in Washington State, which I think is, you know, it could be on the top. But anyway, that was a great example of how this regulatory systems work for some of these products.
Aaron Sarnoff, Two Town Cider. To addressing Senator Solomon's concerns, all of these packages, their labeling is regulated by the TTB, the Trade and Taxation Bureau, or the FDA, depends on the ABV. All of them are required to list their alcohol content. All of them are required, you know, there's a number of requirements on the label that dictates what that product is and where it's sold. So I hear, you know, regular concerns about these fireballs or the buzz balls, you know, possibly being, you know, more favorable towards children. But again, these are legal wine formats that are TTB approved formats of fill. There's certain sizes that you're allowed to fill a wine package in. These are compliant. And the label is also compliant with federal regulation. So, you know, if there's concerns about this, there is a mechanism federally that would control what formats we would be allowed to package alcohol in. But again, these are not in violation of those laws, you know, despite, you know, reservations about the colors or shapes of the package.
Aaron, acronym.
Trade and Taxation Bureau, or the FDA, which is Food and Drug Administration. It depends on your ABV and commodity type, which regulatory.
And then I think the overall concern is true. They are regulated. It is important to recognize that the sad reality is your average human being teacher probably in politics and do actually what's on it, which is sad. And it's obviously occurred in the past, and it's something that is going to be important to watch for all any kind of anything, because even the excessive caffeine is a huge issue.
Sarah Lochner, hello. So I just wanted to also clarify that Senator Solomon talked about the marketing and placement.
Yes.
Which is also part of her concern, not just the licensing. So, you know, kids are at this high level, adults are at this high level, and thinking about how we do a better job of the marketing placement.
All right. So let's move on to categories. You guys did well. At least I will let you off the hook with my reading glasses didn't work. I don't know. We'll see. Okay. So now let's talk about then how with those definitions each of these products are taxed, right? So malt beverage first, it's based upon a volume. Okay, so it's a barrel of 260, but most people will talk about it as 8 cents per gallon. And important for the for malt beverage, there's no that's for any size supplier, any size brewer. And I'll hit with wine that that distinction will make sense here in a second. Wine has 2 tax rates, and then it has a carve out. So I want to hit this and make sure I get this right. So wine has a 65 cent per gallon. That's not right. Yeah. 67 per gallon. Well, I got it.
That's right.
Oh, yeah, 65 per gallon. And then if it's in the higher ABV, there's an additional 10 cents per gallon. Aaron was catching me on for the wine board. There's a 2 cent per gallon additional tax. And that's one of the few restricted taxes. And in other words, that tax has to go directly to the wine board for their function. And we'll hit that in a second. It's confusing a little bit. And then for wine, there is a floor. So the first 40,000 gallons are not taxed, they're exempt if the producer produces less than 100,000 gallons. So there's a carve out basically for small producers for wine. Did I get it right so far, guys?
Can
Okay.
you say that last part again?
Yeah, so, Dan or any, so for small producers, 100,000 gallons or less, the first 40,000 is not taxed. So it's a carve out for a small winery. Did I say that right?
Yes.
It's very intimidating being around a group of experts and trying to inform you, so bear with me. Does that make sense?
Yes, and
Yeah, exactly. And then for cider, as Aaron said, cider is also kind of categorized by ABV. So it's treated basically as malt beverage if it's 8.5. And then if it's over 8.5, it's treated as wine, as a tax. Okay. And then distilled spirits, we don't do a tax, we do a price markup, and I'm going to explain that. But yeah, go ahead.
Jason? You're on mute. There you go. Hey, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
Let me make him an attendee and see if that helps. Jason, can you try again? Must be something on his end.
You.
I can't unmute him. He has to do it.
Okay, Jason, can you try to unmute yourself again? You seem to be on mute from our perspective.
He's in the chat now.
Can you tell us how many small producers fall under the no term?
No.
Or not no tax, but probably under that.
Yeah, I didn't prep that. I don't know if one of the experts here has that.
Under the wine small exemption, many in the industry. You know, there's, well,
Many in state.
Oh, all of them. Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
well, yeah, sometimes you hear there's more than 1,000 wineries. Those are ones that have a winery license, right? And, not all produce the same amounts, right? And we think roughly 70% of our industry in the state, produces less than 5,000 cases. So they would fall under that 40,000.
So just really hard to figure out. Okay. Thank you.
And as Craig will note that since they're not paying that privilege tax because they're exempt from that, it's hard to kind of track that.
And it changes a lot.
I'm hoping you heard that part.
That I was just, so is it annually?
Say your names.
Oh, sorry, annually, so,
Oh, sorry.
alcohol drug policy division, so is it annually?
And
Okay, so we depend on the harvest.
okay. So what I was gonna say is for distilled spirits, it's not a tax. We'll talk about that. It's a markup because we're the wholesaler, right? So it's a markup on the supply cost. And we'll talk about that. So I tried to make it, Tyler, I think, or someone else made a better way to look at this in a table. Go ahead, Adam. So this is the basics. Malt 0.5 to 16, wine 0.5 to 21 with those carve outs for if it's over 16%, it's 10% more, 10 cents more. And then cider is treated as malt or wine based upon ABV. And distilled liquor is, you'll see a tax estimate for comparisons between control states and licensed states of 22.86 per gallon. And we'll get into the detail of that. Don't be confused by that. I'll just push on. Go ahead. So this is in the back of my Toward Liquor Control book. This is a suggested method of computation of different taxes. They say liquor taxes, but it's interesting because you could see even back in 33, there were products that had different ranges of alcohol content. And in the book, they were suggesting as they come out of prohibition, a taxation method that would be based upon alcohol content. They've got a factor for proportion of content. And I put this in for you so you can see that's always been contemplated and is discussed, was discussed back then. They've got production cost in there. I think, distilleries, I think, are less production cost, right? You've got tax levied to discourage consumption, where the light beers would have no tax for that. As it gets up a higher ABV, they'd have a tax to discourage liquor consumption. And then you could see for sparkling wine, which was champagne, they were trying to do basically a luxury tax. So none of these are new ideas. They've been around. They were around in 1933. And then I pulled a quote from the Tax Foundation from December of last year, so 6 months ago, which says basically the same thing. Recognizing the diverse and changing landscape of alcohol products is essential. By tailoring tax structures to reflect the external harms and characteristics of each product, it's possible to achieve a more nuanced and equitable system within the constraints of and they're talking about the existing tax code, they mean the federal code. So that's the background slide. Okay, so then this is the excise tax nationally. So this is a slide that you guys have talked about, but okay.
Representative Reschke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess my question is on taxing beer and wine, when does that happen? Does that happen? Who is it taxed? Is the distributor taxed? I know the consumer's not taxed directly. So I'm thinking it's probably the manufacturer is taxed, because on spirits, we know that it's a markup. So that happens at the distribution level that gets passed on to the consumer. But I'm just trying to figure out where it happens with beer and wine. And maybe you covered that, but just wanted to be clear on that.
If I may, Aaron, starting off, Two-Town Cider, excise taxes are paid when the alcohol is removed from bond. And that's usually at the point of sale to either to your wholesaler, or it can be at the point where you label the finished product. And then that tax is then paid to CC.
Yeah, just to Rep. Reschke, to give kind of the state government perspective, the wholesaler basically, when it's made ready for sale, either it's created in Oregon or it's imported and it comes out of bond and is made ready for the market.
So I pay the tax directly to the OLCC because I produce in the state of Oregon. If you're in Washington and you ship into Oregon, then the wholesaler would pay that excise tax when it's brought into the state of Oregon.
Yeah, Jamie Floyd in Posse Brewing. Just to add to that, we actually have tanks that are basically called tax determination tanks. So when they go through filtration and we hit that, that is actually the mechanism for when we are taxed. We are taxed at that point. If we have waste along the way that doesn't get sold, we have to actually reapply, show proof that being thrown out to get a refund back from that tax. We are actually taxed on everything that hits that tank, and then we are responsible for showing proof of lowering that if there is, waste or bad batch of beer, some other situation like that where it is. And then even to the point where we have to contact both the OLCC and both the PPB to say that we are disposing of that. And of course, that may have also additional requirements for wastewater system based on pH or any of that sort of stuff. So there is quite a bit of actual regulation around that, and we're held very tightly to it.
Lots of reference.
Just to add to now with the distributors, there's a new system fairly new at the OLCC, and reporting taxes monthly. And it's been a huge administrative issue. So in-state producers and also distributors. It's really, and Greg has done an excellent job making it better, and team. But
Yeah.
it is a major administrative cost for in-state producers and distributors every month to submit these reports, tax reports.
Yeah, and Jamie, again, to add to that, that a lot of times it's someone on salary who's actually paying those bills, right? Because the hourly piece can take 6 to 8 hours, which is obviously prohibitive for that sort of level. So just to kind of, a lot of times people in pretty high levels are doing that specific work because that relaying it downward to people who may normally do some of that accounting work, they wouldn't get that pace from the company as well.
Last time that it was when it started. It's near here.
Yeah, oh, yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, and again, as Janelle said, there's been a lot of work to sort of fix on that, and which has been greatly appreciated by the many of us that have been endeavoring. So,
Thank you. First of all, thank you. And of course, it was my staff that worked on this. Colin Nealon, our CFO, is online, I think. So thanks, Colin. Different staff to actually make this system work better. So,
Yes. One more question, Mazen?
Yes, just on the tax. This is a privilege tax, so it is on the privilege of being engaged in this business. So it is in importing or manufacturing. However, in order not to tax inventory, it is at the time of disposal or sending out the amounts, and that's why the distributors actually are the one who pay the tax. That's how the legal framework.
thanks, Mom. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so beer taxes comparison nationally. Before y'all saying this is only excise tax. So it doesn't include sales tax. It doesn't include federal tax. And so it's only pinpointing excise tax. Oregon, you'll see there's our 8 cents a gallon. That puts us at 45 in the 50 states. You'll see Colorado is kind of in our neighborhood. Wisconsin's in our neighborhood. Some of the big period producing. Missouri's 6 cents a gallon. So those are the beer excise tax. These are the state excise taxes throughout the country. And as Mazen said, and the other suppliers, it's a volume-based tax. And basically it's a privilege for bringing those products to market either through import or creating here in Oregon. Okay. Wine at 67. So this would be 67 cents. So this would be table wine is worth 31 out of 50. And this is that basic rate. And I don't think they tried to figure out the small wine exception that Dan was talking about.
Okay. Thank you for displaying these Janelle with the money figures. If I could just add, these are so fascinating to look at. When you look at beer, the birthplace of Miller Coors, the birthplace of Anheuser-Busch, the birthplace of the Oregon Brewers. I mean, there's a reason, and this is sort of one of the points that we make about these taxes. There's a reason why states do not target their in-state businesses for extra taxation, and it's really evident. Look at California, huge wine region. It's really evident why when you look at this stuff. So it's not just a talking point that we use, it's states we're not targeting Nike, sorry, and money represents Nike. We're not. So that's why.
Sorry. Representative Rushby, please.
Thank you, Chair Sanchez. And just to Ms. Romaine's point, if you look at Kentucky in the last 2 slides, I'm just laughing at how protectionist they are. You're going to drink water or you're going to drink bourbon. That's pretty much kind of how that thing looks slanted.
Yeah, and that's Craig back. And that also, this is by design, right? With a control model, you want the lighter alcohol beverages are more accessible and cheaper generally. And then you'll see, then you got liquor is the next slide, Adam. And so again, to compare licensed states and control states. So the licensed states, it is a tax. In the control states, it's a markup on the supply costs. You can see we're second highest in the country. Washington, when they lost their control model, They're to blunt the fact that you have now thousands of outlets, they raise the tax to the highest in the country. And you can see there's and that is also talking about markets, is why Washingtonians have made, what's the name of the store, Steve, on the
Jansen Beach.
Yeah, Jansen Beach, I think, is one of our highest sales stores. So these are important. You know, the state lines are important. This is the state control of alcohol taxation.
So, Greg, is the Wyoming and New Hampshire just like nothing?
Oh gosh, Tyler, I can't remember what Wyoming is. Why they're
Because it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't recall off the top of my head, I'm just believe that's because
They don't tax it at all.
Yeah, I'll check. We'll check on that. I think that's right.
I mean, New Hampshire is a control state though.
Yeah. On the, yeah, it's interesting. We'll get on that. I apologize. I didn't notice that. So thank you. I was focused on local. So, okay. So I just said, for a controlled state, then you don't have a tax because you are the wholesaler. So how do we do it? We determine the price for each spirit, and we then do a markup on it. So I'll show you the markup. Go ahead and to the next slide. So this is for this is liquor that costs less than $78 per case. You can see, and if this is not special ordered, that has an extra cost of $12 because that would be something that's not in the liquor store. If we have to then run an individual bottle to that liquor store, we mark that up as well. But you can see you've got 12 bottles in a case. If it's a $75 case, there's the markup of multiply by 2.131. You've got a freight charge. You then divide that by the number of bottles to get a bottle rate. You round that up to the nearest 5 cents. Right, Laura? Am I doing this right? And then you add a 50-cent surcharge. The 50-cent surcharge the OLCT put in place in 2008 as a temporary surcharge. It's still in place. What's that?
2009, I think.
Yeah, 2009. It was after the economic crisis in that era, the real estate crisis. And that's still in place and I think has a, it's up to be renewed or considered next summer by
July
2025. And that surcharge is approximately $45 million per biennium. And I'll get into that when we talk about the distributions. And then if you've got special order, I think we got enough detail. And then next slide. Yeah, please.
This is one of the cool things about the control system, that you can get whatever you want. And that is not true in other states. If you want some rare bottle of whiskey or whatever you're looking for, the state can order it for you and you can get it. It's pretty amazing what the state can do in this space, just in terms of the access to the brands.
Carol Lochner Flo, just quick, what happens with that markup? That's a nice markup.
Goes to y'all. We're going to distribute it here in a second. Goes to y'all. So,
I just one question, because you mentioned it was put in place after the financial crisis. What was the consideration for charging more money?
I mean, I think so because the general fund of the state was hurting with the real estate crisis, and that's when it started. I point to Laura because, you know, Laura's my executive assistant and really runs the OLCC. So that was the background basically.
Yeah, I figured. I just thought it would be good to make sure that was the case.
Yeah. So the distinction I want to make super clear. We can go ahead to the next one. I don't think this is for if it costs more. I don't think. Go ahead, Adam. Next one. Before we do this one, so I want to make sure everyone understands the OLCC sets the price. So there's no legislative requirement. It's we have a 9-person commission. A vote of, can change the price. And that is really the control model. And so that's why we're investing in the warehouse, because we want to maintain that control model, make sure we can be a good wholesaler, maintain it for the suppliers, have the variety that Danelle talked about, get it out to 285 stores and have it so that then it's not in the thousands of licensees, and really make sure that that higher alcohol content, which is more likely to be abused, excessively consumed, is in those smaller number of outlets. Another thing I want to hit is floor pricing. That is one of the innovations that Oregon's OLCC put in place in 2021. We are the only states that has a floor price for distilled spirits or liquor. This is recommended by the CDC, SAMHSA, the World Health Organization, and Arno, I don't even know what that last alphabet one is, OECD.
Organization for Economic Development.
Or Organization. Thank you. And so floor pricing is something that OLCC put in place so that you don't have a race to the bottom on price. So it's set, for example, a fifth of vodka. It can be it has to cost at least $8.95 at retail.
Representative Solomon, or sorry, Senator Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. My question is perhaps cannot be answered at this moment, but I kind of wanted to just put a little pin in it that because Craig had mentioned the alcohol warehouse, and will we at some point hear potential, because in this conversation that we're having, we're talking about money that is needed for prevention and such. Are we going to be talking at some point about the potential for revenue that will come from that warehouse and where that is going to be earmarked or set for?
Senator, yes, I think we can hit that when we talk about alcohol sales. And the punchline is right now, liquor sales are flat. So we'll talk about that. And I do have the revenue forecasts for all the alcohol sales. So I think we'll get to that.
One question from Jason. What has been the impact of minimum community?
Yeah, I think we'll go to the next slide. What we've seen in a basic evaluation is it reduced sales of when we increased the price of those products. We did an internal evaluation. I think Peter and TJ did that. So a couple of our staff, and then that's been modeled throughout the world. And CDC's modeled what it means in alcohol-related deaths. This has been evaluated in Scotland. In Scotland, they did it. It's interesting. They did minimum. Try to say minimum unit pricing. They did minimum unit pricing for all alcohol. So you took that 0.6 ounce serving of alcohol and you multiply it by a minimum price per serving. I think it's at 65 cents per serving. And you then see how many servings are in that container and you get a minimum price. And one of the things about that is, as you all know, I think from one of the first slides, is alcohol harm doesn't hit everyone the same. People in poverty, it hits harder. And I think that's because there's less protective factors. We talked about that. If you do get into trouble and have an alcohol use disorder and need treatment, it's harder to access that. I think I can't remember if it was in this room, but for the, if I had an alcohol use disorder, my wife would make me sleep on the couch and would be mad at me and make me go to treatment. But that's because I have an opportunity economically to do that. So one of the benefits of minimum unit pricing is it reduced consumption the most by those that have the most harm, because of that paradox of, even though people drink the same amount, the harm is really more on the lower socioeconomic status. And that relates, of course, as we heard in one of the prior, to the our Native American population has the highest harms, not because of more consumption, but because of some of those socioeconomic factors.
Tom OHA, I'm Gene. Just pointing out here, the CDC model is looking at OLCC type model, distilled spirits only. And you pointed out that Scotland was for all alcohol, and it's a significantly higher percentage. And of course, there's differences between the countries, but that could, to some extent, represent the difference between taxing only liquor versus Same all in one. No. In terms of the health effects, that's.
Aaron, with Two-Town Cider, I should note, or I'd like to note that the alcohol attributable deaths is based on the CDC's RD tool or some version of it. And effectively, the RD tool estimates death based on consumption. If consumption rates increase, it will estimate higher death. If consumption rates decrease, it will show lower. So those rates that you're seeing there are not really, it's an estimate of a potential lowering of death based on what they see as just a lowering consumption. So it's not, I always look at that with a grain of salt because it's a one-to-one or not a one-to-one. But if consumption drops, RD tool will say proportionately death will drop. If consumption increases, RD tool will say, death will proportionately increase. So it's kind of another way of looking at consumption more than controls of death, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, and that's based on the actual association with literature.
Distributor, I had a question on this too, because the same time you modeled this, consumption of all these categories gets lowered. Like, do you have actually real data on this, or is this just about people living less?
Well, we did it in Oregon while, that was in 2021. So that was when we were really still increasing before we plateaued. I can get back to you on, I hear what you say, was the trend already down? I think they controlled for that, Danelle, but I can get the detail on that. And then, Aaron, I wanted before you, your statement of question, a companion that some of these other states or countries have done is basically prohibiting loss leader sales. And loss leader sales, actually it's Euro Cup soccer time. It's kind of, that's the epitome of it, is to get the young guys into your grocery store. You sell that lager beer at lower cost than it actually costs to produce. And some of these states, that's almost like a companion to floor pricing or minimum pricing. So it's a concept. We can do it for distilled spirits. The OLCC can. It's not a tax. It's a price floor that really would be something at the retail, the retail level.
Aaron, Two-Town Cider. One other question. You said that the 112 impacted brands saw a decline in sales, but we saw overall consumption of spirits increasing. So did we just see consumers basically, when price went up on the lowest tier stuff, they just moved to middle tier since it was proportionately down the same price anyway?
Yeah, that's correct. Great question, Aaron. I mean, I think we just did a basic analysis. We didn't control for the word that substitution or things like that. We did see that people moved up shelf. We did see that the products that we raised, there were less sales. So I'd have to get into the weeds, and I don't know if we were as methodologically robust as the CDC study. And then some of the evaluations in Scotland where you'd have a methodological control for some of those things.
Director Prince, Jason Manover-Gag, and my staff for the OLCC as well. I don't think we sort of answered this one, but does the state have projection the impact of continued beer, cider, and wine in the
No, that's Jason, it's Craig. We don't yet. We don't have it like that. And so I wanted to make sure this concept was out there, but we don't have that done yet.
Okay, when you're positive.
Aaron, with Two-Towns, one last, just beer and wine currently are already higher than the minimum price that we already have set for spirits. So getting the cheapest beer you can find is already higher.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly, and Aaron, I don't want to disagree. I mean, I think certainly the Oregon products are certainly at that, depending on what price per ounce they did. It might get some of the cheapest. I don't know.
For low, and it's still more than the minimum price.
Usability.
Oh, yeah.
Chair, thank you, Chair. I just want to step back a little bit to those people that are most heavily impacted by this disease. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and when I went through treatment, I was surrounded by people from right off the streets, and I had much better opportunity for success because I had a strong family and I had access to better facilities and finances than those people that are subject to, whether it's economic and certainly racial or ethnic backgrounds that just didn't have the support that I had out there. And I want to reemphasize the disparity between somebody like me who came out to a strong community to those that just had to go back out into the street because they didn't have the support.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I think Adam will go to the next one. So now let's talk about revenue, Sarah. So where does that markup go, right? So now we're talking about revenues, and then we'll talk about distribution. So all of that sales in a biennial framework, you have $1.7 billion. And so you can see that that is the real lion's share of the revenues that can be made available. So that's the gross alcohol revenue. You see licensing fees, you see the privilege tax, and then you see distilled spirits. Now that includes the surcharge. So I want to then go to the next slide. So this is important, and we've talked about this several times, earmarking, and it also is mentioned in the charge of the task force is distribution of the revenues. So really, I want to talk about where there are dedicated funding streams, dedicated funding from the alcohol revenues. The first is 50% of the private the privilege tax revenues. This goes to the OHA and to that mental health, alcoholism, and drug services account. And when we heard from our partners, the county partners, they focus on this. This is what they were talking about. And so that's a dedicated or a focused funding. And then I think we talked about the Oregon Wine Board, that 2 cents per gallon, and that goes specifically to the Wine Board for their mission of promoting the Oregon wines. Let's go to the next slide. So the bulk of it is not restricted, it's unrestricted. And by the way, the control model, the control perspective, as different from the person who has to make the whole ways and means system work and have the general fund for everything that we do in state government. The control model says the social purpose of the pricing is number one. You price and you have that as your number one. And number two is this more narrow fiscal purpose. Easy for me to say, right? So general fund gets 56%, state government 56%. Where does it go? It goes to all the things that the general fund funds, or you can say, if I want mine to, I think about it going to this or that, but it's not restricted. The legislative process and the co-chairs of Ways and Means really set that with the, and that's so important.
I just add that most people don't think about where all the money goes, but first and foremost, it goes to continue the current service level for every agency in the state, every single agency in the state. And then it goes to some of the one-time things that we need, the infrastructure pieces, the different programs that we're trying to develop, and all of the things that come up, the stuff and things to run the entire state. And a lot of times it's going to those cities or counties to supplement what they don't have. So there's a lot of different, the budget is massive, of course. Our education system still needs lots of resources, all kinds of stuff needs lots of resources. That's where that money goes. And so when the conversation comes up about, why can't we use some of that money? It's because that money is already in process. It's already being distributed primarily to continue to fund the current service level of existing agency programs and structures.
Just to know, but the distributors, I agree with you. I was with another client today, and that agency, which is not OLCC, their current service level to meet current service level for 25-27 is 20% increase in their budget. 20%. There's nobody in the private sector who's going to be able to keep up with that hungry city needing that type of money. And it is just daunting to hear those sort of numbers from the state. But then industry or business or somebody is gonna be asked, they need to tax you to keep up with a 20% increase every 2 years from the state. It's just, I just say that, and I know that's not what we're talking about right here, but it is, we're never gonna be able to keep up with that.
You're right. We're never going to be able to keep up with the in-state board and have to have some really, really hard conversations about the way we actually bring in resources and the way we distribute our resources. We have a kicker that makes no sense. We gave away $5.6 billion. Right? We do not have a sales tax. We do not have lots of ways that other states bring in resources. So here's our reality. We have to figure those things out. Everybody has to be a part of that conversation. And when it comes to the ballot, I don't want to.
Chair, Senator Solomon was, before,
And yeah, we actually have a couple of people online. Senator Solomon.
Thank you, Chair. I was curious about you don't need to move the slide, but the slide before talked about, I think it was 18 million that went to OHA from the tax, their percentage of the tax. And I was wondering if there is accountability, oversight, or is that like into a general fund as well? Or is there stipulations on how they can spend that money specifically?
Tom Gino, HA. I don't know the exact answer to that, but I think it's not just a general dump of money. A lot of it is.
Formerly of OHA Behavioral Health. It goes into the mental health and alcoholism drug services account, which is a statute, and in statute it specifies what it can be used for. It goes to pretty
I'm sorry, I got one more online. So Laura.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. I know that there's some distress, saying that we'll never be able to keep up with the increases. But I do just want to point out that beer and wine tax has not been increased, since the late 70s, early 80s. So, there's a little bit of catching up to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, point one, you mentioned that we don't have a sales tax, but I would like to reference the cat tax is a sales tax, but not on the end consumer, instead on corporations. And unlike a sales tax, which is charged once, it gets charged over and over and over and over again. For example, the apples in my store will likely have been taxed 6 times by the time they're on the shelf, because the grower gets taxed, the juicer gets taxed, distributor gets taxed, I get taxed, and the store gets taxed, and each of those compounds over and over again. And it is part of the reason why I believe we have that 5.6 billion surplus. So we have this cat tax, separate numbers, but and then
the corporate tax. It's separate there. But let me just tell you, yes, you're probably correct. And if we had a statewide sales tax, that would be different.
And then I guess my other question was, we're 56% goes to the general fund, and as you said, we have a kicker where we refunded $5.6 billion, and I understand we're currently operating in a surplus again, which means that we will likely have another refund. It's entirely possible that a large percentage of the money that we are currently raising is not being utilized, but being refunded, correct?
882 million, oh, sorry, 582 million at this point will likely be in the figure if everything occurs by October that.
So it is potentially possible then to allocate those funds without impacting any existing programs, because they would be refunded otherwise.
Legally, no.
How is that?
Because the kicker is this.
Well, I mean, if you were to legislate that we would spend those.
We could not legislate that just because that was it's the will of the people. It would have to go to the voters to change the kicker.
Exactly.
That's not legislation.
Okay.
It's different. There were the questions on your phone.
Oh, I was just going to ask, does anybody know how that funding mechanism was created for cities versus counties and kind of the rationale?
They passed old legislation.
Yeah, this is Craig Vaughn. I talked to Scott Winkle about it at the league. We presented this actually I don't have a good answer, but you can see there's two different ways it was defined in statute. If you want, Tyler and I can dig into the legislative.
My only thinking, because I was looking at this, is, you have cities getting revenue by two different methods, and the counties obviously getting a lower portion of the revenue when the counties are the ones who are actually providing services. And it seems like revenue sharing would make some sense for counties, because if you have somebody who has high sales, maybe there are higher issues that they're dealing with. And I don't have any idea how that was created, but it does seem strange that that's the way that it's set up.
It's amazing to me oftentimes how various bodies of the legislature made really interesting decisions about how things happen. And if you think about it, isn't it the 61 and a half or something years of age was the time when you could get something on the federal level? Like, that was a massive, bizarre compromise that once may happen. But it's truly somebody else's way in the past decision about how that came up. And changing things that happened in the past is sometimes very difficult. But I'm a group for doing it. But difficult. Mazen.
Yes, I think with this distribution, this almost goes back to the time of the repeal of the prohibition. There was at the beginning, all hands were off from the federal government, so a lot of local and state governments went on their own, just like marijuana are today. So a lot of the cities were having their own taxes on alcohol and on buying alcohol. So when the state came out with an overarching scheme of taxation, there was an agreement to compensate those cities by formula for what they were giving up in collecting taxation. So that's why that the 14% is a revenue sharing by formula to compensate these cities for those losses.
Got it. Thank you. So folks, we do have a few more slides. If we can hold our questions for a little bit, that would be really, really helpful and allow
Finish
to
up.
get through this.
Thank you. And so, again, to come back, purposes of tax, social broad, the regulatory is the reason for the tax from the control model. Obviously, the narrow fiscal is the second most important to fund the general fund, the cities. Of course, we heard it from them. Mostly that's DIY and police and roads. We're the second largest source of funding for cities is from this distribution, and then counties, as you said, with more the services, all unrestricted. And the third thing I want to say from the book is no tax, according to like the way the toward liquor control, should be punitive on the manufacturer just because they're in the business. And again, that was kind of from the Prohibition era, that alcohol was defined as evil. And so those are kind of the three purposes for tax from a control perspective. Let's go to the next one, talk about the difference then if you have a volume-based tax, and this is from 1970 to 2023, if you have a volume-based tax and you have inflation and the dollar doesn't go as far as it used to, you could see the impact of inflation that we've all felt there at the end. The power, the buying power of the tax decreases. And that's because it's volume based. So the privilege tax doesn't go up or down with the cost of the supplier. And then this is the hardest slide. The next one is we tried to control for population growth and control for the fact that people drink liquor more now. There's been a long trend of moving toward liquor for some time that finally has plateaued, and we'll see that here in a second. But if you control for inflation and you control for the fact that people drink liquor more, so we have more proceeds off of it, and you control for the population, this is an attempt to kind of look at what per Oregonian over 21, how much money is made available per person. And so, Aaron, I was saying this is the slide that you're gonna hate because it needs to be unwound and I won't be able to do it very well, but I'd love to talk about this one. What we're trying to get at is a couple things. Population's grown, inflation has increased. Liquor is more what people choose as a, even with the control model or anything else. And so the per person amount of dollars that are available, you can see the difference with a markup off of the supply price versus the volumetric that it basically stays static. Next slide. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, Tom, just one comment on that. It seems like part of that equation could be that, overall prosperity has increased and people are able to buy more expensive liquor.
Yeah.
As opposed to just drinking more whiskey.
That's true. Yeah. And
that's part of that equation.
And we'll get a little bit into when we look at Steve's data, we'll look at sales data in dollars and cases sold. So you can kind of see the overall, how much is sold versus factoring in the price. And there was a time when you could see premiumization. People were able to buy a shot more. And Steve, you're welcome to help me out on that slide if I get to it. This next slide is one that the Senator Solomon, Senator Knopp, Senator Reschke, Rep Reschke, and the chair will recognize. This is the distributions. So you can see the cities and have the two ways, but it basically is 175 million is the estimate for 23-25. The general fund, you can see it's slightly larger than the 56% because it includes the surcharge, the $45 million surcharge. And then you have the county share. And then I think last but not least, the OWB is a very little white slice there. Sorry. And then the account at OHA. So that is the distribution formula expressed in a pie chart. To Senator Solomon's question, and this is something that we presented in February to our economic development subcommittee of Ways and Means. Liquor sales have really flattened. So this is sales in terms of dollars comparing 22, 23, and 24. So you saw year over year increases. You saw during COVID an increase in sales by volume and an increase in the dollars, almost 20% in a biennium. That has really stopped. And so we are still well over capacity for our warehouse. We're over the Deloitte & Touche want to be at any warehouse about 80% of capacity. We're at 100% or more. You want to see what being at 100% or more looks like, we'll invite you to the warehouse where you'll see liquor stashed where forklifts should go, and happy to show that to you. So that's, Tom, go ahead.
It looks like you've got blue in the middle is 2022. Is that, do you know if that's correct or if the 2022 and 23 get mixed up there?
I'll have to check, Tom. Let me check.
I mean, the bottom line is that 2024 is the lowest. So,
yeah. It's really been flat, a little low. And Steve, we've got that to May. And liquor sales is seasonal. So the 4th is coming up, and then the holidays. You could see the holidays is the big bump. Steve, anything you want to add on that?
No, the interesting for us is that those sales have fallen off more in the second half of the year. They have the first half of the year. You can see those drops for 24 are more pronounced, and the second half of the year is the higher volume. Yeah, part of the year for us.
And so the why is this national. I don't think that this is the same thing that every state is seeing. And then everyone's trying to figure out why. Is it Gen Z is drinking less? Looks like it. Is Gen Z using THC products more? Looks like it, but it's still pretty early to see. But this is a national trend. So it kind of goes to Senator Solomon's. I don't think there will be an increase in liquor sales to earmark, which is one of the things that I think the prior administration was, projecting during COVID, because it was going up every year. We're not seeing that now that as we come out of the pandemic. Next slide, and I'll wrap up here with that last couple, Chair. Next slide, Adam. You go to the next one. So Same thing, we've talked about this. Craft breweries have really had a hard time in Oregon. When you look across that whole, with the imports and Oregon, and imported, really stable funding. If you look at the last 5 years per year, the last 10 years per year, it's been about the same. There's not been growth in that. The growth in sales has been in liquor. Slide. And we talked about Opto and the difficulties of Opto and how we've tried to make it a little bit easier to work with. You'll see this is Danelle and Aaron and Jamie. This is what we've been trying to pull out of Opto for the last few years. So this is last few months. So this is across the categories when it's made available, and we can see the privilege tax. You can see the top is malt beverages. It's decreased from 22. Obviously, COVID had a crazy thing on beer because it doesn't, people staying home and so on. But this is the post-COVID. You could see it really flattening out. Table wine flattened out. Dessert wine flattened out as well. So you're seeing some of those. The trend is flat across the categories. And then I think what you're seeing in Oregon is the craft beer market is really struggling more. And you're seeing, I think, some of the products like White Claw, which fits into the malt beverage category, and some of the changes in consumer tastes. You're really seeing a changing market. We'll skip any personal testimonies on that, but I know there's a licensee named Magoo's that appreciates that. Last slide. Again, to Senator Solomons' point, we tried to do a projection. I apologize, it's probably the hardest slide to read just visually, but looking at the Office of Economic Analysis's forecast, you can really see really pretty flat for the next up to 2031. And we are going to have to factor in debt service on the warehouse into this as we start to have to pay those bonds. And then, of course, I want to put a flag in. We also want to sell this parcel of property that is our current warehouse, and the Millport property, which was estimated to be about $28 million. Would love to make sure we can get that into paying off the debt service so we don't disturb the distribution to the cities, counties, and the state. But to answer Senator Solomon, it's fairly flat. The projection for alcohol proceeds is fairly flat.
Building again. First thing I thought it was the ducks.
Yes. The geese will need to be squired out of the courthouse by someone else when we sell this property. Yeah, but it is a valuable property. It's too small for our needs. We have 2 warehouses basically in a complex. It's too small for our needs, but it'll be pretty prime, I think, commercial property to sell hopefully in the 25-27 biennium. And we will need to do that because we will have the debt service start to kick in. And that is my last slide, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
So thank you guys so much for your attention.
Well, needless to say, we sort of did a lot of questions in between. I think, as I have another question, I still see your hand that's there.
Prior.
Yes. Okay. If there are there any other questions right now? Because again, we're about 15 minutes. But I do need to make a few announcements. Yes.
I'm Dean Hoyche. Prince T, I'm just wondering, and I'm not sure it's super relevant for our discussion. I'm just wondering what percentage of the total liquor revenue covers your operations here. How that compares to what you're sending out.
Collins on, it's about 8 or 9%.
So it's very low, and most of the revenue liquors go down to the state.
Yeah, if you look at, I mean, we have I can send you the chart. We pay for the liquor. we pay for the freight, and then we pay for all the regulatory and my staff. And I think it's around, I wish Laura was here. Steve?
Yeah, Colin might be able to jump in there too. It's a little bit hard to measure because in state budgeting, you've got budgeted items and you have unlimited budgeting. In some cases where it doesn't matter what the volume of services are, it's going to get paid for. So for us, the cost of transportation and the purchase of liquor are unbudgeted costs. So when we look typically at the state's budget, those don't really show up in there in terms of cost. So when we talk about something, our margin being that big, that's not actually considering those other components. So it's still sizable, but it's not quite that. Our cost ratios aren't quite that.
Sure. Yeah, just my opinion is, it seems like a pretty efficient use. And if you compare that to a private liquor system, there's a lot more people taking money out of it on the way than big control states.
Oh, well, so Laura.
Yeah, I just had a quick question. So the Oregon Wine Board, I know a portion of the funding goes towards advertising or marketing. Are there any lobbying efforts by the wine board? Does anyone know?
This is Fawn with the Oregon Wine Council, and Jana can feel free to jump in. No, they do not lobby. That's what the statewide associations do, and why you have the two of us here. And I would also say that the funds are used not just for marketing, but a lot of the funds are used for research and for education purposes. So there is, I think, significant research projects that have been done, especially as it relates to climate or, the fire situation. I mean, we've had a lot of various projects that have gone through there, and then education in terms of, presentations for industry about things that are happening in the industry or ways that they can do a better job at their profession. So, Jana.
Yes, Jana McCamey with the Oregon Wine Growers Association. I just wanted to add that the Oregon Wine Board, most of the funding comes from an industry self-assessment. There's a $25 a ton assessment for wine grape growing that funds the majority of the work, and then the 2 cents from the privilege tax is additive to what the industry is putting in. But as Fawn mentioned, no lobbying, and it does fund a broad array of work in the education, research, and marketing space. But not of individual brands, really. It's more the overall brand Oregon.
One quick note, before we move on, there's a question online. So it's from Jason Renault, and I think Colin will be able to answer this. Can staff OLCC provide state regulations of alcohol? And and wanted to also get the can OLCC share the 2022 evaluation mentioned in the slides? So Colin, you can probably cover that.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. For the record, my name is Colin Nealand. I'm Chief Financial Officer for the agency, and I will have to get back to you all with Director Prinz on that question in the chat on the regulations. But to OHA's question about, how the distribution works and kind of how efficient the model is and kind of where the money is going, what we can share with you is that a little under half of the gross revenues from distilled spirit sales goes towards just paying the cost of the alcohol and the freight, or moving the product, receiving those products in and sending them out, and then of course paying the alcohol. And then we pay our overhead, both administrative and the cost of the warehouse staff and those things. And then all what is left is what you see in the distribution, where almost $600 million is distributed to the state general fund, cities and counties. So when you look at the 1.7 billion from a biennial perspective of those gross revenues, about half of that going to pay cost of goods sold, and then about 600 million going out state general fund, cities and counties. So that's kind of a rough overview of how the money comes in and then how it goes out.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Aaron Sarnoff, Two Town Cider, in reference to your comments about the markup and efficiency of the OLCC. When you do look at the private sector, the markup for beer and wine is almost identical to the markup for spirits. We just go through a private distributor and a private retailer. But again, if I sell it to my distributor for $10, it'll be on the shelf for $21. Same with the liquor, you buy it for $10, they'll end up on the shelf there for about $21. So it is very comparable, and then of course we have a tax on top of that we also have to earn in our cost of goods.
Tom Dino and James, just in response, thanks, Aaron. It's good to hear. I will note that I believe in Washington, when they privatize liquor sales, the overall cost of the consumer went up there.
That is correct. If I can, yeah, it did, because the state hefts the money that they were earning from distribution of spirits, but we're no longer distributing. So then we now have to pay a distributor on top. So the money that they were already earning, they effectively kept in the form of tax, and then added the cost of distribution and retail private on top of that.
So, seems less efficient.
Yeah, and now just to finish that up with the distributors, the reason the state was made whole intentionally when Costco privatized Washington State. That was an intentional tax that was added in the measure in order to pass with voters, just to show them that their state services would not be effective. That's why you have this exorbitant price right now in the state of Washington was in order to privatize there. I just want to thank you guys so much. I have been doing this for a long time. I've never heard anyone else go through the history like this. Seriously, and it can be really boring for people. I love this subject. It's fascinating. It's so interesting to think about our history and how we got here. And we've covered so much. I really appreciate it a lot, even though I don't agree with everything you said.
We talked about that.
But I do think so much wasn't covered. And I hear these questions on marketing. There are so many regulations on producers and distributors and retailers. And if we screw up, they take our liquor license. We can't be in this business. And we didn't cover any of that, which would take a whole nother meeting. I don't think we need a meeting to do it. But I'm just saying, it's not, alcohol is not potato chip. It is heavily regulated, where the size of a sign, of what you can give to a consumer, who can touch the alcohol in the grocery store, what the price is that's sold to retailers. I could go on and on and on. If you go through the OLCC regs or the statutes, you will be shocked by what we can and can't do. And it is a maze. And this is what I do for most of my job for working for the distributors, is answer questions about what they can and cannot do when they are selling to retailers. It's not about tax or whatever else. It's about what can I do when I'm selling my product. So it is, again, it would be, I think, interesting for this group at some point, because I don't think we ever talk about that. But it's hard to be in this business and these laws have a purpose, but they're a lot of fun.
Okay, folks, I was going to cut you all off at 5 minutes before anyway. But thank you for finishing up. So just a reminder, our next meeting is scheduled for July 18th. It's here. It is hopefully in this room, 1 to 3. We will hold July 26th, just in case. That is a Friday. We'll also be here again, hopefully in this room from 1 to 4. Ron Sullivan. And then the letter is going to be out really, really soon, like maybe within the hour, if not longer, maybe. That will basically put some outlines in sort of our overall our charge here as a committee to make some determinations of where we go from here. Let's see, and then of course, we will have folks available, Matt, and of course, if there are other questions regarding sort of tax distribution, that type of thing, you're normal to answer questions that we might have. Senator Shulman, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a quick question. So just to clarify, so the meeting, there's going to be an invite sent out to get it on our calendar, correct?
Yes.
For the 18th, and then you're still going to keep the other one, but
okay. So the 18th should already be on your calendar, and it's not.
Nope.
Well, then somebody delete this. It should be there. But you can resend that one again, and then the one that we did the Google poll for came up with the 26th, which is a Friday, July 26th, as being the best option for most folks. That actually got us to quorum. So,
The 18th not on my calendar either.
okay, so we'll make sure we resend that then for folks.
Thank you.
It's Craig. I just wanted to thank my chair again, Dennis Doherty, for his support and for his leadership in 23 especially, and then going on in 24. So Dennis, thank you very much. And then I wanted to thank the staff that really does the work at OLCC. You're kind of surrounded by them and you're here at the building. So thank you to my chair and my staff.
Thank you. Very, very much. Appreciate the work. Appreciate the comments and just all that's happening here. This is not an easy task for any of us. So I appreciate your attention and just the ability to sit and listen. Ability, did you want to say something, sir?
Dennis, did you want to say anything?
No, well, I want to put this right back to you. Thank you for stepping up in a very difficult time and doing such a phenomenal job. You're making us look good, but it's a lot of work that's going on between you and your staff that have taken on at a tremendously difficult time, and you're all overloaded and performing at a very high level. So thank you for that.
Okay, well, with that, we are adjourned, folks.